But now I really would like to pass it on to my good friend Camilo Patrignani, the CEO of Greenwood Energy, and he's going to moderate a discussion focused on energy. So.
President Calderón, please. Mr. Andrés Gluski. So welcome to the Emerging Climate Economies discussion. We have the privilege of having two very experienced gentlemen in the energy field, and particularly in Latin America, and we'll try to mix it up with aspects around the world. And I'd like to take a quick dive into the first question. It's around Latin America, and we have seen a very robust growth over the last decade or so. A lot of social progress. And today we are having to balance the environmental necessities versus the industrial change or development. What do you think is the role of energy in supporting and underpinning economic growth in the future for Latin America?
Well, thank you, all of you. Clearly, energy is, let me say, the energy of the economic growth. No? Whenever you want to have strong economic growth, as we all want to have, it relies a lot in one of the most important inputs, which is energy quality and availability. But the point is, talking about Latin America, the point that we're raising is, the last decade, we started to talk about the decade of Latin America, and we were really proud about that. But the problem is, the most of that economic growth, which was so strong, and that was the case of Brazil, for instance, another, was relying mainly in the price of the commodities, which after the entrance of China to WTO in the year 2000, roughly, China started to buy almost everything around the globe, from mainly commodities, not only commodities, but from minerals, gold, silver, oil, food, grain, everything. So prices went up dramatically, and that implied an incredible economic growth, especially in all those economies in Latin America that are quite intensive in commodity export, which is the case of Brazil, it's the case of Argentina, it's the case of Bolivia, it's the case of Venezuela with oil. But when the Chinese growth started to decrease, and after the crisis of Lehman Brothers 2008 and 2009, prices on commodities went down dramatically as well. And that implies that all those economies relying mainly in this export went down as well. We are talking about almost 2 years of recession in Brazil, and the forecast for the economic growth in Latin America is roughly less than 1%, maybe half a point, which is for this year, which is really, really bad. So that's my point, but it's crucial, the energy. Now, good news in our side is the energy reform in Mexico passed in Congress finally 2 years ago, a reform that I proposed in 2008. Finally, it was passed a little bit late 2 years ago, but that implied an incredible opportunity for the country and the region. Not only by providing economic growth, but with the shale revolution in the United States, Mexico could share that improvement in technology, and that could imply that our manufacturing sector, which is already quite competitive. When I took office, Mexico was the 9th largest exporter of vehicles in the world. Currently, it's the 4th largest, and it will be the 3rd one in the next year. With these new prices of natural gas, very low, and more gas in Mexico, that will foster the competitiveness of the country even more.
Well, as the president said, energy is vital for economic growth, but I would also say for social inclusion. There are two things that really improve the quality of life of poor people. The first is having access to clean drinking water, and the second is having electricity. So when you talk about like the new generations of digital, of mobile, cellular, of other things, they all depend on energy. So for Latin America, it's very important to have growth in its capacity to supply energy, and to supply energy to everybody. So one of the things that we've had, I think, in Latin America over the last decade is a good public-private partnerships in some countries. You know, my country, company, AES, for example, between Brazil and El Salvador, working with the Millennium Challenge, and working with the local government, for example, Luz para Todos, for Millennium in El Salvador, we've brought electricity to 500,000 people. Now, you tend to think of Latin America of having a very good penetration of electricity. But actually, in the favelas and out in the rural areas, you still have people without access to good electricity. So I think, you know, thinking about Latin America going forward, Latin America has a lot of renewable capacity, has a very green system, but we still have to work to bring electricity to everybody and affordable electricity and sustainable electricity.
Great. Any other ideas on how to power economic growth in Latin America? And also I'm curious, what place do you see for renewable energy on the energy matrix in Latin America today versus in the future?
Let me say not only for Latin America, but globally, renewables are coming. Let me fix that, are already here. A lot of people, probably include myself some years ago, still thinking renewables like a fancy thing for kids, no? Like oh, you can enjoy it, but it's not important. It's just for joys. Now the point is, technology has made that renewables are in several countries, regions, and even in several places in the United States are as much competitive as fossil fuels sources of energy. Investment is going there. How much of the new investment in power generation do you believe, and this is a question for the audience, no? How much of the new investment in power generation do you believe was done in renewable energy last year? Give me one number, 1%. Who say 10%? Who say 20? Who say 40? More than 50%. More than 50% of the total new power generation investment in the world is in renewable energy. It's already here, and it's going to happen, and it's better that the governments could apply public policies that open the possibilities for that, because it's good for the environment and good for business. You have a quite important projects in your company going all the way to renewables with batteries. And I think it's the moment to switch that. In Latin America, it's the same. When I took office, there were not single power generation coming from the air, wind power. Now we have almost 2,000 megawatts already in place with a 42% rate of effectivity and probably 1,000 gigas in projects more. And with only a small part of the desert of Sonora could provide with solar energy to the whole country. So we have a tremendous potential. Latin America has a tremendous potential. Yes, we have oil and natural gas, but we need to change that mentality, and we need to increase our perception about that the future that we want implies a clean future in energy as well for a region and for everyone.
Yeah, Latin America, I mean, it's very interesting. South America is very hydro-intensive. So you actually have countries like Brazil, Colombia, which are 70% hydro, their energy today. So you can count that as a renewable. Now, when you look at Mexico and Central America and the Caribbean, you still have a lot of burning of liquid fuel, a lot of oil-based fuel, diesel, heavy fuel oil. And as the president said, with the coming of the cheap American shale gas, you're going to have a big conversion in Mexico towards more gas and much cleaner. But speaking of renewables, you really have to have the right renewable for the country. So, for example, Mexico, certain parts of Mexico have great wind. In the north, Oaxaca, but great solar. And you have to adapt what is the best for that country. Now, what is the big problem with renewables? Because the potential to generate energy is there. I think it's undeniable. But the big problem with renewables is they're intermittent. You know, solar is 8 hours a day. Wind is when the wind's blowing. So that intermittency causes two problems. One is the quality of the power. There's great fluctuations in the power, in voltage and frequency. And there's also the time difference. You know, the sun may not be shining when you want to see the World Cup or you're watching the Super Bowl. So the holy grail, really, of the energy sector, renewables, is really batteries. We started working on this 8 years ago. And we really think we have a product that works and that it's effective. So today we have 100 megawatts installed. We're building another 100 megawatts, and we have another 100 megawatts we already won the projects. We have to start them. But as the president was saying, part of this, for example, is in California and Hawaii. That future is there. There's so much solar rooftop that actually the spot prices during certain hours of the day are almost zero. So the real key, what we won there as a project, is to actually take that energy during the day and then have it available when people get home and turn on the air conditioning, turn on the TV, turn on the cookers. So we think that the prices of lithium-ion batteries, which fuel these, are getting cheaper and cheaper. So in the future, that will allow even more renewables to be put on the grid, addressing those technical issues and addressing the cost issues.
Okay. So Andres, AES operates in 18 countries and 4 continents. Do you think renewable energy has a better shot in Latin America? And also in terms of the storage, the lithium battery deployment, Asia, Africa, for instance. How's your view in sort of a more global basis?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, again, Latin America, I think, has a great potential. One of the first places we actually put the batteries to work was in Chile, because they had very modern legislation. Because that's one of the things. Since it's new technology, you have to have the regulations that allow that to happen. So I see a lot happening in renewables because there's a big push. If you go across Latin America, everybody has some sort of renewable standards or a carbon tax coming in. So you're going to have rapid growth of renewables in Latin America, I think, without question. China's building a tremendous amount of renewables. So I think the real question, for example, is what's going to happen in India. And it's very interesting. Prime Minister Modi announced that he wanted to have 175 gigawatts of renewables by 2022. To put that into perspective, that's one Brazilian electric sector, with Itaipu and everything that means. It's a very ambitious program, including 100 megawatts of solar. And they want to do microgrids to jump some generations, like Africa did, for example, with mobile telephones. But that's going to require a lot of technology. It's going to require a lot of investment from abroad. It's going to require, again, things we think like batteries in India. And India really, I think, is the frontier for the fight of global warming, because you're going to have 1.5 billion people in India wanting electricity. And depending on what fuel they choose for the future, it's going to depend a lot the growth of the emissions of greenhouse gases.
Right. So going back to Mexico, perhaps, the country is undergoing an energy reform. And this, in theory, is going to bring substantial foreign investment and also help develop the local infrastructure. What do you think are the opportunities and challenges that the different stakeholders are going to face when that's prolonged?
Well, the opportunities are huge for energy sector, the traditional fossil fuel sector, because the reform opened all the way from upstream or from drilling and exploring to downstream, even refinery, transported, everything. Mexico has, for instance, talking about only shale gas and shale oil, Mexico has the 7th and the 6th largest reserves in the world. And in natural gas, we have a very close amount of reserves, very similar to the total of the United States. So there is an amazing opportunity. Of course, if the reform were approved, when I was president and proposed it, the price of a barrel of oil could be like 120. Now, what, 39, or what is the price today? But so the opportunities are much less than we were expecting. For instance, there had been this year the 3 first auction regarding new licenses for drilling, for either producing or exploring. The first bid was about exploring. The government 1.5 years ago was expecting $4 billion in new investment a year in the next 3 years. My estimation is that I am estimating that with the company that won that bid, they are planning to invest only $400 a year. So the expectations are coming down dramatically. But this is a learning process. Yesterday, there was a second auction. 3 fields were assigned out of 5. It's going to be not for exploration, but only for production. It's easier to do that. But the reform is opening that investment, and Mexico has a very good chance. That could have an incredible boost for economic growth. I don't know, maybe in the medium term will be 1% additional of the inertial economic growth path we have right now.
Yeah, we see we're very bullish on Mexico for many of the same reasons the president mentioned. First, in Mexico, a lot of manufacturing is located in Mexico because of NAFTA, the free trade agreement. Then you have cheap energy because of the gas that's coming into the United States. Again, in part thanks to NAFTA, until Mexico can develop its own gas reserves. So that's very positive. So energy demand is expected to grow around 5% compounded annually in Mexico. But you have 65 gigawatts today in Mexico, and they need to convert a lot of these fuel, which are burning diesel and burning heavy fuel oil over to gas. So some of it may just require new plants altogether, plus the renewables. So we're very bullish in Mexico. We recently have a local Mexican partner, and we're trying to get into that market, although we've been there since the early 90s. We built one of the first private plants for CFE back when President Cedillo was inaugurated.
I'll go to Cuba, actually.
When do you go, or what?
Well, I'll let you know, actually. You can join me. So it's been interesting to see the relationships between the US and Cuba getting closer over the last year, but there's still the embargo, and Cuba needs to invest in pretty much every sector. The energy sector, I think, is the most important because it fits into all the others, including tourism. How do you think they could approach the modernization of their grid and their power assets and their energy infrastructure in general? And if you may offer a guess on when the embargo is going to end.
Maybe later take the first part. You can talk about when the embargo ends.
I would prefer the first one.
Well, they have about 6 gigawatts. It's a quite small system, and it's mostly heavy fuel oil. Cuba, the system is very old. In the past, it's operated so bad that in Cuba, the joke was instead of blackouts, they had light-ins. They had, instead of apagones, they had alumbrones. The light came, you would run and do things. The situation has improved somewhat because of the investments of Venezuela in the sector there. But it's a very old sector. It's very heavily fossil fuels and diesel specifically. And in fact, the system's so bad that about 37% of the electricity generated in Cuba is by small independent diesels that people have on their house and have on their business. I think it's going to take big investments to change it. A lot of people have done this, and renewables, but also efficient gas plants, et cetera. But I don't think the conditions are there today to really attract foreign investment. And I don't see any initiative for that to happen.
What is clear is the geographical conditions of this island is it has everything to be a winner in renewables completely. Let's see this. Countries that are not rich in natural resources, are not rich, let me see, in fossil fuels, which is the case, not several of the islands, but also Chile, for instance. Chile is building probably one of the largest solar facility in the world, I don't know, 200 megawatts or something like that. And it's not for the government, it's not for the utility, it's for a mining company. So what I want to say is it is not because that company has an incredible philanthropic heart. It is not because it's quite involved in renewables and look about the world and take care about the carbon emission. It's because it's a real business. Renewables are becoming to be a real business, very profitable one. I'm chairing the Global Commissions on the Economy and Climate. The goal of the Commission is how can we provide arguments in order to get clear commitments regarding climate change and carbon emission reductions. We conclude that we need to demonstrate with a bold economic argument that it is possible to have economic growth, bold, a better economic growth, and at the same time to tackle climate change. And what we discovered after 1 year, we presented 2 reports already, is that it's completely affordable, it's a real business there. Cuba can provide all the electricity they need, and even the energy in the future, coming from solar or wind and other renewables. They have a little bit of oil, but I think the weight is that. Now, talking about the embargo, let's see. The big question we need to make is, after 50 years of embargo, let me see, when I was president, I say, Fidel Castro was president as well, ending years. So, well, Mr. President, he is older. When you got the presidency of Cuba, I wasn't born yet, no, in Mexico. And that's true. But after all those years, embargo didn't work, no? So a change is necessary. How do I see the new policy of the United States? I think it's a good shot, a good intention, but I would like to see more active diplomacy in order to change the authoritarian regime in Cuba. It looks like I would say, well, we are friends again, nothing happened. No, that is not true. Of course something is happening. It's a very authoritarian regime. We saw the Pope visit La Habana, and suddenly they released like 2,000 people from jail. What is this? No, it's an authoritarian regime. And we cannot just say, well, we are friends again. Don't worry for that. I would like to see more active foreign policy in the United States, more active foreign policy everywhere, including in Mexico, in order to end the authoritarian regimes in Cuba and in Venezuela and others.
Thank you. That's great. Shifting gears a little bit, China. A slowdown in China is feared by every country's economy, pretty much, and it's showing signs of weakness. How do you think it impacts Latin America? Negatively, neutral, positively maybe?
Sure, well, I think it'll vary a little bit country by country. I think Mexico will be the least impacted by a slowdown in China because it's exporting to the US, and in some cases its manufacturers compete with the Chinese. But the rest of Latin America, I think, was part of this super cycle, I think, which is the president started talking about. And this super cycle had good parts for Latin America. It was a windfall of the last 20 years. And I really think there are three factors which affect growth in Latin America. One is this commodity super cycle, there's no question about it. The second is we've had a very low interest rates in the US and in the EU. So that also helped Latin America. But the third pillar for growth in Latin America really has to be structural reforms in the countries. So unfortunately, low interest rates and the good prices for commodities weakened somewhat the structural changes that many countries were doing. So now is the time to do it. So if there's a weakening in China today, I mean, I think a lot of this is starting to happen. You're seeing the growth stop. But it's not the only thing affecting the economies which are suffering. It's also the lack of structural change. You could also have a rise of interest rates in the US at some time in the future. So I think now's the time to take those structural reforms to get growth back on a sustainable track into the future. And that this commodity cycle, again, comes and goes, but you really can't count on it. And to some extent, I think in some cases, it actually slowed down structural reforms.
Let me add that building on that, probably in Latin America, we are observing, well, each country is a different case, I agree. But roughly, let me say there are two kinds of models of economic growth and public policy. One is this model relying mainly in commodities, exporting commodities, with a very high level of protection for domestic industry, which is the case of Brazil. And maybe all those countries in Mercosur, this club in which everybody is like a closet and only boys here. Another model we follow in which we bid on free trade, for instance. We open free trade with 44 countries. Now Mexican products have access to more than 1 billion of consumers in the world to zero tariffs. We reduced, even in the middle of the crisis, I was very criticized because I reduced tariffs for inputs for any industry from 12% on average to 4% on average. And that allowed Mexico to go quite strong in manufacturers. In the 80s, 80% of our total export were oil. In 2010, only 16% of our export was oil. So becoming very competitive on that. Of course, when the commodity was in the peak, of course, other countries grew much better than us. But now we have a more stable economy, relying more in aggregated value, manufacturing chains, and so on. And I hope we can jump into services and more sophisticated technology. Now, one point about China, or two. One, we need to discuss about if this super cycles is really what is happening. If you analyze the long-term trend of commodities, the last century, it's a negative slope clearly. And there are some exceptions in which there are some peaks. One is in the First World War, others is in the Second. A third one is in the 70s crisis, more related with the gold standard was removed and so on. And the last one is this, when China got into WTO and it's allowed to trade with everyone, that's the other peak. But it's correlated with very specific events, but in the long term it's negative. So even though China recovered its growth, I don't believe that commodities could recover as well. Why? Because the new model of China, if they are successful in that, will be a model more reliant on services than in crafting, manufacturing, and consuming. So it's going to be, and they openly say that, must be more labor intensive, less commodity intensive to say, if that success. But well, what is going to happen to China? Are going down even deeper? I don't know. It could be.
Yeah, it's difficult in China to really know the numbers. They tend to hit their GDP numbers very exactly. If the goal is 7, it's 7.1, you know. So I think one has to really look at the imports, exports of China, look at their electricity consumption, cement consumption. And I think what has a lot of us worried is really the debt at the state enterprise level and the debt at the local governments. Now, you know, China has enormous reserves, so it can face up to that. But certainly, you know, it's hard to make a detailed analysis with the data we have.
Well, one point related with Latin America, I forgot to say this. These leftist countries in the region, or semi-leftist, let's say, some of them, are completely protectionism. It's in the DNA of the populism, Latin American populism, which is protect the industry, establish a bunch of tariffs around, protect your borders. And that is the source of the lack of competitiveness of a lot of countries. So are those countries going to remove the tariffs and protectionism? I don't believe so. Look at Dilma. Dilma is suffering a lot right now in politics and the economy. I think she wants to improve the competitiveness of the Brazilian industry. But the mentality, she's an economist coming from Cepalin school and Cepal and so on, her mentality is the way to strengthen the industry is by protecting the industry. And it's the other way around. You need to allow the industry to compete. You need to allow the industry to import any input coming from everywhere. 80% of the world trade is more related with middle products, intermediate products, and inputs. It's not final products.
Yeah, interesting. And how do you think TPP plays into this? Do you think it's a balancing element, or is it going to create winners and losers?
Both things.
Trans-Pacific.
You're one of the fathers of it. So
No. The TPP in particular and the Pacific Alliance follow that logic. Of course, it's going to be, I'm a believer in trade. Trade is one of the engines we need the most in order to recover economic growth. And TPP will foster trade in the most promising region in the world, which is the Pacific Sea. Now, are going to be there winners and losers? Yes, like in any other trade scheme. So, but the aggregate level, clearly there will be an improvement in the global economy, in particular for these countries. That what we need to do is to analyze in detail who is going to be those losers in order to help them to get a smooth transition to the more productive sectors. But it could be a fantastic bet. I'm afraid that for some countries and government, even in my country, are still thinking to protect some sectors. For instance, the agricultural sector in Mexico has terrible, to say that, or incredible, let me say, protection in the political side, because most of them, the leaders of the owners of those farmers, very powerful, are members of the Congress and the traditional political elite. And they always get something to be protected, which is ruining the productivity of the Mexican agricultural sector, and we are losing a lot of opportunities there.
Well, I'd say basically from the business perspective, you know, we're very much in favor of these free trade agreements, and we think that in many cases signing these international accords helps those who are trying to make structural reforms in the country make them. Because saying we have to do it to be competitive, you know, or as part of this agreement. So I think that they're very good, especially when it's tough to make reforms, as you were saying. There's always vested interest. The losers, when you make reforms, tend to be very concentrated. They feel a lot of pain. And the winners tend to be spread out among all consumers or among all workers. So for that reason, we very much support the free trade agreements that are being negotiated.
Terrific. Well, we have 30 seconds. I have a couple questions. One I'm not going to ask. You can thank me later. There's one that is a little off topic, but I think could be interesting. It's not too complex. What is the role of Russia and China for the future of Afghanistan in terms of military security and mineral extraction? Wow. You don't want to know the other one was.
And the other one?
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. How much foreign investment have you attracted since 2014, and in what sectors?
2014?
Yeah. So it's anonymous.
No, 2013 were one of the biggest, but it was because the very famous Corona beer, all of you, who likes Corona beer here? Please, Andrew. Okay. The very famous one, Corona beer, was sold, and the operation implied like $14,000. 14 billion. That's was the size of the operation. Of course, and according to the law, that was accounted in 1 year later. So the peak was like 27 billion a year. And they went down in 2014, probably roughly below 20 billion. And I hope with the reform now, we can increase again. I'm talking about Russia and China. Oh my God, no, pass.
Pass.
You are an expert.
I'll pass on the Afghan question. But I would say that what's interesting for Latin America needs a lot of infrastructure. You know, when we talk about modernizing the sector, it takes hundreds of billions of dollars, you know, to change an electric sector. You know, think, you know, $1 million, you know, to build any power plant or even the renewables, it's going to take a lot of money. This is a good time to do that. Interest rates are very low. There's a lot of money sloshing around capital markets. So if you create the right conditions, I think developing countries should take advantage of that. But they should let the private sector do it. Because if the private sector does it, and we invest, and it ends up a bad investment, that's our loss. Or if we do well, it's our investors' gain. But if the government does it, and it turns out to be a bad investment, and that's a different, causes all sorts of problems. And furthermore, there's only so much money that the government has from taxes, and that should go to those things that the private sector cannot directly address, social issues.
One point about this, probably behind of the second question is, what can be done, what must be done in order to get economic growth, to get investment, or whatever, in Mexico and our region? And I would say the key, my conclusion after being president is the key secret of economic growth and development is first, rely in the freedom of the people, so bet on free trade. Second, invest a lot in capital, mainly human capital. So we opened 140 new universities and 1,100 new high schools in Mexico, all of them tuition-free. Now we are graduating more than 100,000 engineers a year, and that is providing even more competitiveness in the manufacturing sector. Invest in capital, in infrastructure as well. We increased investment in infrastructure from 3 to almost 5% of GDP a year. We're talking about like more than 50 billion a year in Mexico in infrastructure. And it's because we opened the system for public-private partnership. And a lot of, actually we created an investment fund privatizing all toll highways already in place. And with that money, we foster and enhance more investment on that. But the most important one that Mexico and Latin America needs, if you are walking in the beach and suddenly you find a lamp and a genius coming out of the lamp and say, ask me for one desire. What could be the one desire? I would say rule of law. Rule of law. Because maybe you cannot have, you could have not oil or gold or silver. Mexico is the largest producer of silver, is the second producer of gold, is oil, whatever. But if we have not rule of law, there will not be investment as is needed and as we can receive. And the same for Latin America. We are falling in this fall. We are failing because we are providing a lot of uncertainty for investors with corruption, with crime, with the lack of enforcement. And that's the capital sin of a lot of developing countries. My conclusion is the difference between developed and developing world is that either you have rule of law or you have not.
All right, well, we ran out of time. Thank you, everybody, for participating.